For almost 800 years, one question shaped the destiny of an entire continent. Who does Spain belong to? The Cross or the Crescent? This wasn't a border war. This wasn't a rivalry. This was a centuries-long struggle where empires rose, fell, and rose again, all in the name of faith. Kings were made, kingdoms were erased, and entire civilizations lived side by side, sometimes in peace, sometimes in terror, but always under the shadow of a conflict that refused to die. This was not one war. This was the Reconquista, the longest holy war in European history. A war where faith reclaimed a continent, but not without losing pieces of its own soul. In the early 8th century, Europe was not a fortress of Christianity. It was fragile, divided, poor, and constantly at war with itself. The Christian kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula, Asturias, Navarre, León, Aragón, were small, isolated, and struggling to survive barbarian invasions long before Islam arrived. The idea of a united Christian Spain did not exist. It was a dream invented later, for political convenience. In reality, medieval Spain was a mosaic. Celtic cultures in the north, Roman ruins everywhere, Visigothic nobles clinging to power, Jewish communities thriving in trade, and Christian peasants living in fear of whatever kingdom collapsed next. Europe was not ready for a new empire. And yet, one was coming. In 711, an army crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, led by a man half legend, half mystery, Tariq ibn Ziyad. He marched with a force so small that medieval chroniclers refused to believe the numbers. But the Iberian Peninsula was weak, riddled with civil wars among its Visigothic kings. So when Tariq's army landed, it cut through Spain like a blade through dry grass. Within 7 years, almost the entire peninsula came under Muslim rule, not because Islam forced its way in, but because Visigothic Spain collapsed under its own weight. The kingdom had rotted from the inside, and the Muslim armies simply walked through the cracks. But here is the twist most documentaries never show. The Muslim-ruled territory, Al-Andalus, did not become a land of oppression. It became one of the most advanced civilizations in the medieval world. Córdoba had streetlights, while Paris was still a swamp. Libraries with hundreds of thousands of books, while most kings in Europe couldn't read. Medicine, astronomy, philosophy, architecture, all flourished in a way Europe had not seen since the fall of Rome. Christians and Jews lived under Muslim rule as protected peoples. Taxed, yes, but allowed to keep their religion. This wasn't the world of crusade propaganda. It was something far more complicated. And complexity is dangerous, because the Christian kingdoms in the north did not simply see an enemy in Al-Andalus. They saw a rival richer, smarter, and more powerful than anything Europe had produced in centuries. The Reconquista was not just a holy war. It was jealousy, fear, ambition, identity, all wrapped in theology. The Christian kingdoms that survived in the northern mountains, tiny, cold, poor, were not supposed to last. But they had one advantage Al-Andalus did not: unified desperation. In Asturias, León, and later Castile, Christian refugees gathered from across the peninsula, all of them fleeing war, taxes, famine, or punishment. They shared no single origin: Celtic, Romanized, Visigothic, Basque. But they shared one belief: they had nowhere left to fall. When you have nothing, faith becomes a weapon. These northern enclaves told themselves a story that would shape the next 700 years. We are the last defenders of Christian Spain, even though Christian Spain had never actually existed. Narratives win wars long before armies do. The first battles were not glorious, not heroic, not crusades. They were raids on caravans, ambushes in forests, night attacks on garrisons, small fortresses stormed by peasants, but every small victory became a symbol, and symbols attract kings. By the 9th century, Christian rulers discovered something incredible. Every mile reclaimed from Al-Andalus brought land, wealth, peasants, and taxes. Suddenly, reconquest was not just faith. It was business. The Reconquista was not born from a sermon. It was born from opportunity. Faith justified it, but economics sustained it. And in a world where poverty was normal, a war that promised land was a war that would never end. By the 10th century, the North and the South were locked in a cycle of raids, counter-raids, alliances, betrayals, and shifting borders. Sometimes Christians fought Muslims. Sometimes Muslims fought Muslims. Sometimes Christians fought Christians. Sometimes they all fought each other. This was not the clean us versus them story told in later centuries. It was a civilization tangle where faith and power could not be separated. But slowly, relentlessly, the Christian kingdoms pushed south. Not by miracle, not by divine intervention, but because Al-Andalus began to fracture. Civil wars, splinter kingdoms, power struggles. And when a great empire fractures, smaller ones rise. The Reconquista had begun for real, and soon it would become the defining conflict of medieval Europe. By the 10th century, the Christian kingdoms in the north were still small, patches of stone fortresses surrounded by mountains and forests. But they possessed something Al-Andalus did not: adaptation. While the Caliphate of Córdoba flourished in culture and science, the northern kingdoms flourished in survival. They learned to fight in terrain where cavalry was useless. They learned to govern through alliances instead of wealth. They learned to turn every loss into motivation for centuries. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Every time Al-Andalus fractured, the north grew stronger. Empires collapse from inside. Frontiers survive because they must. One northern territory transformed more than the others. Castile. Originally a borderland of León, Castile was nothing but a chain of castles. Small fortifications built to slow Muslim armies. But frontline regions breed frontline people. The men of Castile became hard, brutal, pragmatic. They were raised in war, trained in war, and lived with the understanding that peace was only a pause between raids. A kingdom of castles became a kingdom of warriors. Castile didn't grow because of culture or diplomacy. It grew because families fleeing south settled there with one expectation: we will take back the land one day. Faith turned into identity. Identity turned into politics. Politics turned into expansion. And Castile discovered a truth that would eventually reshape Spain. The frontier is where nations are born. While Castile grew through warfare, two other northern kingdoms evolved differently. Navarre became a master of diplomacy, a kingdom wedged between France and Al-Andalus. It survived by shifting alliances. sometimes with Muslim emirs, sometimes with Christian kings, sometimes with both at once. Navarre proved a fact most chroniclers hid. The Reconquista was never simply Christians versus Muslims. It was everyone versus everyone. Aragon was unique, a mountain kingdom with few resources. It compensated through ambition. It married into Catalan nobility, merged cultures, and then looked outward toward the Mediterranean. Aragon didn't just fight for Spain. It fought for influence across the sea. Sicily, Sardinia, southern France. A kingdom that small was never supposed to dream that big. Ambition became its weapon. León is often forgotten in popular Reconquista stories, but without León, the war would have been impossible. Why? Because León understood something most medieval kingdoms didn't: documentation. León produced charters, treaties, property rights, marital alliances, and legal codes. A kingdom that can record its claims can defend them forever. León provided the bureaucracy Castile would later weaponize to justify conquests. Faith gives passion. Law gives legitimacy. Together, they become unstoppable. By the 11th century, the northern kingdoms discovered the most powerful weapon a fragmented region can possess: a myth. They began to spread a narrative that they were descendants of the Visigoths, the last Christian rulers before the Muslim conquest. This was not historically accurate, but it was emotionally accurate. People don't fight for accuracy. They fight for meaning. The kings of the north declared, "We are not expanding, we are restoring." A brilliant reframing. It turned conquest into justice, war into destiny, ambition into holiness. The Reconquista wasn't just a military campaign now. It was a mandate. And mandates never die. For centuries, the Christian kingdoms made small gains. A fortress here, a valley there. But everything changed when Al-Andalus fractured. In 1031, the mighty Caliphate of Córdoba collapsed into dozens of small kingdoms called taifas. Taifas were wealthy but insecure, refined but competitive. Instead of uniting, they paid northern Christian kingdoms to fight each other. Pariahs, protection tributes. This meant Muslim gold funded Christian armies. Christian kings grew richer than ever. Muslim taifas became political pawns. It was the moment the balance of power forever shifted. As one chronicler said, the Muslims lost not to Christian swords, but to their division. With gold flowing in, population growing, and kings uniting, the northern kingdoms finally gained momentum. They captured Coimbra, Zaragoza, Toledo, Valencia. Each conquest justified the next. Each victory enlarged the myth. And soon, the Christian North no longer saw itself as a corner of survivors. It saw itself as the inheritor of the entire peninsula. Every battle, every raid, every siege was now part of something grander. A centuries-long mission to reclaim a continent in the name of faith. And the next phase, the age of crusades, holy banners, and kings who believed they carried God's will, was about to begin. A phase where the Reconquista would transform from regional conflict into a continental holy war, where alliances would shatter, dynasties would rise, and heroes, both Christian and Muslim, would carve their names into history. The calm before the storm had ended. The real Reconquista was about to start. By the beginning of the 13th century, the Christian kingdoms had momentum. But momentum is not destiny. Destiny only happens when the enemy falters. For decades, the Muslim South had relied on taifas, small, wealthy, independent kingdoms. They bought peace with gold, and gold can silence armies. But only for so long. Then something unexpected happened. The Almohads arrived, a fanatical empire from North Africa, strict, disciplined, determined to restore Islamic unity in Iberia. They were not poets, not philosophers, not merchants like the Andalusians before them. They were warriors with a single message. We will crush the Christians and end the Reconquista forever. For the first time in centuries, the South was united again. The North felt the pressure like a lid sealing shut. The dream of a Christian Spain was about to be smothered. Almohad armies defeated Christian forces at Alarcos in 1195. The defeat was catastrophic. Castile lost thousands. Borders collapsed, villages emptied. Fear spread through Christian lands faster than news itself. For the first time in generations, Christian kings asked, "Is Reconquista over?" Castile panicked. Aragon hesitated. Navarre retreated into diplomacy. León remained silent. The Almohads planned to crush Castile next and erase its existence. But then something unexpected happened. A miracle in politics, a rarity in medieval Europe. The Christian kings united. Enemies became allies, rivals became brothers. Even the Pope stepped in. The Reconquista, for centuries fragmented, finally had a single voice. And that voice said, "We fight together, or we die separately." Pope Innocent III, the same pope who had launched the Albigensian Crusade in the south of France, issued another decree. A crusade in Iberia. Not for Jerusalem, not for the Holy Land, but for Spain. Anyone who joined received the same spiritual rewards as fighting in the East. Knights, mercenaries, pilgrims, fortune seekers, all flooded to Iberia. The Reconquista was no longer a local conflict. It was now a continental holy war. Faith had become a banner. Europe had become an army. And the Almohads finally felt what the Christian kingdoms had feared for centuries. Pressure from all sides. In the summer of 1212, an alliance of Christian kings, Alfonso VIII of Castile, Pedro II of Aragón, Sancho VII of Navarre, plus thousands of Crusaders from France, Italy, and beyond, began marching south. But the Almohads had an advantage. They controlled the mountain passes. One narrow passage through the Sierra Morena blocked the Christian advance. It was guarded heavily, impregnable, death on a cliff. The Christian army stalled. Days passed. Supply lines weakened. Morale dropped. Heat killed horses before battles began. Then came a twist so cinematic, it feels like fiction. A local shepherd, or perhaps a Muslim guide loyal to an Andalusian rival, showed the Christians a secret path around the mountains, a hidden trail no army had ever used. Historians debate if this was betrayal, coincidence, or divine providence. But one fact is clear. The Christians appeared behind Almohad lines, like an army rising from the dust. The path to battle lay open. On July 16, 1212, two forces met on a scorching plain. A united Christian coalition versus the massive Almohad army of Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir. This was not a raid, not a siege, not a skirmish. This was the battle for the soul of Iberia. The Almohads arranged their troops in deep ranks, with African infantry, Andalusian cavalry, and war drums echoing across the valley. Behind them, the Caliph stood protected by elite slave soldiers chained together in a human barrier. It was supposed to be unbreakable. The Christians charged. The heat baked their armor. Dust blinded their horses. Arrows fell like burning rain. At first, the Almohad center held. Then León faltered. Aragon bled. Castile suffered heavy losses. The battle hung by a thread. And then Navarre moved. Sancho VII of Navarre, a king almost forgotten by history, led a direct assault on the Caliph's chained guard. His men hacked through the chain wall link by link until the supposedly invincible guard broke. The Caliph panicked. The Almohad army collapsed. Fear spread faster than order. By dusk, the battlefield had turned red. The unbreakable empire had broken itself. Las Navas de Tolosa was not just a victory. It was a signal, a declaration that the momentum of 8 centuries had reversed in a single day. The Almohad Empire, so strong, so feared, shattered. Cities rebelled. Taifas broke away. Leaders questioned the Caliph. The Christian kingdoms, once fractured, now marched with renewed conviction. The myth they had told themselves for generations, "We are restoring Spain," finally felt real. Faith had become confidence. Confidence became expansion. Expansion became destiny. This was the hinge of history. Without Las Navas de Tolosa, there is no Castile as a superpower, no Aragon Empire, no united Spain, no fall of Granada, no Columbus. This battle did not just change Spain, it changed the world. And after 1212, the Reconquista entered its most relentless phase. Because victory is intoxicating, and intoxicating victories demand more. The next centuries would not be peaceful. They would be a march, slow, bloody, inevitable, toward a single final city that refused to fall. Granada, after the defeat in 1212, the Almohad Empire didn't collapse overnight. Empires rarely fall in battles. They fall in arguments. And Al-Andalus began to crack in silence. Taifas blamed the Caliph. The Caliph blamed the generals. Generals blamed one another. The unity that once terrified Christian kings now dissolved into whispers and rivalries. Las Navas de Tolosa was not the moment the Reconquista triumphed. It was the moment Al-Andalus began to lose faith in itself. And once a civilization doubts itself, armies become decoration. When the Almohad central authority weakened, the old system returned. The Taifas, small kingdoms, rich, cultured, brilliant, but fatally competitive. Seville, Granada, Valencia, Malaga, Murcia, Almeria, each ruled by emirs more afraid of rivals than Christian kings. And this reopened the wound that had doomed Al-Andalus a century earlier. Division. Taifas paid Christian kings for protection. Often they paid 2 Christian kings at once. When a Taifa feared another Taifa, it called on Castile or Aragon, and those armies never left empty-handed. Christian kings loved these payments. Gold-built fortresses, gold-armed soldiers. Gold turned survival into expansion. As one chronicler wrote, the Muslims bought peace, and in doing so, paid for their own defeat. After Las Navas, Castile transformed from a frontier kingdom into an expansion machine. Kings changed, but ambition didn't. Ferdinand III united Castile and León. He forged military alliances. He negotiated truces to isolate Taifas. He used Taifa gold to strengthen his armies. And then he moved south city by city, river by river, valley by valley. His strategy was brilliant. Don't attack strength. Attack isolation. Taifas fell like dominoes. Ubeda, Jaén, Córdoba, and then, shockingly, Seville, the greatest Andalusian city after Córdoba. These were not minor towns. These were the jewels of Muslim Spain. Córdoba had once been the intellectual center of Europe. Now its great mosque echoed with Christian bells. Seville, with its towers rising from the river, had been a symbol of Andalusian might. Now Castilian banners flew from its walls. Al-Andalus was shrinking, not because it lacked warriors, but because it lacked unity. The collapse wasn't military. It was structural. Demographic disadvantaged Christian populations were booming. Muslim and Jewish populations were declining due to migration, famine, and internal wars. Geography favored the North. Castile expanded across open plains, perfect for cavalry. Taifas relied on cities, and cities once surrounded die slowly. No unified command. Each Taifa had personal rivalries. Some secretly supported Christian conquests, hoping to weaken their neighbors. The economy fractured. Gold from North Africa dried up. Trade routes were disrupted. Mercenaries cost more than armies could sustain. Ideological fatigue. The Almohads had imposed strict religious reforms that alienated moderate Muslims and Andalusi elites. Faith that is too harsh breaks the people it tries to purify. Christian kings offered defeated Muslims something shocking: lenience. Keep your property. Keep your language. Keep your customs. Just pay taxes and surrender your fortress. It wasn't mercy. It was strategy. And it worked. But while most taifas collapsed, one did something extraordinary. It adapted. The Nasrid Kingdom of Granada was born in 1230s under Muhammad I, small, mountainous, surrounded. Yet it survived for 250 years, longer than anyone expected. How? Granada sat in rugged terrain that neutralized Castilian cavalry. They paid vassal tribute, buying peace for decades. Castile didn't want to destroy Granada too quickly. It wanted a buffer state and a source of steady income. Muslims fleeing Córdoba, Seville, Cadiz, and Murcia poured into Granada, boosting population, culture, and manpower. Granada alternated between supporting Christian kings and Muslim rebels to keep both sides exhausted. Granada became the last fortress of Muslim identity. A poetic, tragic ember, burning against the inevitable wind. Reconquista's greatest weakness returned in full force. Christian rivalry. Castile versus Aragon, Aragon versus Navarre, Portugal versus Castile. Internal civil wars, dynastic disputes. The same kingdoms that united at Las Navas splintered once victory felt secure. Why? Because the enemy was weakening. And weakened enemies are prizes. Everyone wanted land. Everyone wanted tribute. Everyone claimed divine legitimacy. As long as Granada survived, Christian kings could fight each other without guilt. The Reconquista was too profitable to finish quickly. It became less a holy war and more a political economy. By the 14th century, Al-Andalus survived on diplomacy and luck. Granada thrived artistically, the Alhambra rising like a dream over the mountains. But beauty is not strength. Granada's survival depended on tribute to Castile, fear of Castilian civil wars, strategic marriages, playing both sides, delaying the inevitable. Everyone knew the truth. Granada was living on borrowed time, and that time would run out when a new power rose in the north. A power forged by a marriage that united two crowns into one destiny. A destiny that would end the 800-year war and end Muslim Spain forever. For 200 years, Granada survived by playing Christian kingdoms against each other. But in 1469, something happened that shattered that strategy forever. A marriage. Isabella of Castile married Ferdinand of Aragón. Two crowns, two armies, two ambitions, one destiny. For the first time in Iberian history, the two most powerful Christian kingdoms were united under a single royal couple. Not by treaty, not by threat, not by diplomacy, by blood. This was the birth of Spain and the death sentence of Granada. Ferdinand and Isabella saw the Reconquista not as an opportunity, but as a mission to complete what 8 centuries of kings had begun. Granada's final ruler was Muhammad XIII, known to Christian chroniclers as Boabdil. He was young, educated, refined, and doomed. He inherited a kingdom fractured by rival factions, betrayals, civil war, political assassination, nobles plotting constantly. Granada was not defeated by Spain. Granada was defeated by Granada. Boabdil fought not one enemy, but two. Ferdinand and Isabella and his own family. A kingdom that cannot unite, cannot survive. In 1482, Castilian armies marched south. But this was not medieval warfare. It was early modern warfare. Spain now possessed heavy artillery, professional infantry, military engineers, siege cannons, supply lines, military bureaucracy. Granada had mountain fortresses, brilliant architecture, the Alhambra, and internal chaos. Art cannot stop artillery. Poetry cannot stop gunpowder. Ferdinand and Isabella adopted a strategy so systematic, it felt industrial. They attacked fortresses first, the mountain teeth that guarded Granada. Loja, Mochlin, Ilora, Alhama. Each fell. When the forts fell, the valleys fell. When the valleys fell, the cities fell. Malaga resisted fiercely, a port fortified by African troops. It endured famine, plague, and relentless bombardment. When it fell, Ferdinand enslaved thousands, a warning to every remaining town. Your walls cannot save you. Granada understood the message. The net was closing. As Spanish cannons thundered across the Vega Plain, ambassadors from Europe and spies from the Ottoman Empire watched closely. Everyone knew this was the last Muslim kingdom in Western Europe. Granada's fall would reshape continents. The Ottomans were too far to intervene. North African dynasties were too divided. Andalusi nobles were too busy conspiring against each other. Boabdil rode between factions, begging for unity. He received promises, poems, praise, and no armies. Granada's beauty had become a trap. It inspired admiration, but not rescue. Spain constructed a fortified city called Santa Fe outside Granada's walls. A city built for one purpose: to choke Granada to death. It was the message: we are not leaving. Balconies collapsed from cannon fire. Food grew scarce. Disease spread. Starvation crept into every district. Inside the Alhambra, Boabdil faced the impossible. Nobles urging resistance, civilians begging for peace, factions plotting his overthrow, Spanish envoys demanding surrender, Granada could still fight. But it could not win, and its people could not endure another year of siege. On January 2nd, 1492, Boabdil surrendered Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella. He handed over the keys of the Alhambra, the most beautiful palace in Europe. Chroniclers say he hesitated before passing them to the Castilian officers, not because he feared death, but because he knew he was ending not just a reign, but a civilization. Spain celebrated. Church bells rang for days. The Reconquista was over. 800 years of war had ended in a quiet exchange of keys. Legend says that as Boabdil left Granada, he turned one last time to look at the city he lost. He wept. His mother told him, "Do not cry like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." It is a harsh line, but not the truth. History knows the truth. Boabdil did not lose Granada because he lacked courage. He lost it because no one, not the Taifas, not North Africa, not the Ottomans, not his own nobles, stood beside him. Granada did not fall in 1492. Granada was abandoned in 1491, knelt in 1490, betrayed in 1489, and defeated long before the cannons fired. Boabdil was simply the one forced to sign the final chapter. The fall of Granada triggered a chain of events that altered the entire planet. The Spanish Inquisition expanded. Jews and Muslims were expelled. Spain became a global superpower. Granada's surrender freed funds to finance Columbus. The Age of Empires began. The modern world was born. The last Muslim tear of Granada watered the roots of the Spanish Empire, and the mountains that once protected Al-Andalus now echoed with church bells where the call to prayer had sounded for centuries. Granada died beautifully, painfully, inevitably. With the fall of Granada, Isabella and Ferdinand held something no ruler in Iberian history had ever possessed: a united peninsula. For the first time in 800 years, there was no frontier, no taifas, no rival Christian kings, no emirs in the south, no fragile alliances. Spain became one. The Reconquista had accomplished what invasion, empire, and diplomacy never could: unity. But unity forged in war is never cheap. It is paid with memory and silence. The Reconquista didn't just redraw a map. It redrew a civilization. Castilian knights, hardened by 8 centuries of war, became the backbone of the new Spanish aristocracy. Cathedrals rose where mosques once stood. Monasteries expanded. The Inquisition grew teeth. Cities like Córdoba, Seville, Granada were restructured culturally and demographically. To be Spanish was to be Christian, and to be Christian became increasingly narrow. Spain didn't just win a war. It created itself. But creation always has a cost. In 1492, the same year Granada fell, Isabella and Ferdinand issued the Edict of Expulsion. Jews who had lived in Iberia for 1,000 years were forced to convert or leave. Tens of thousands fled. Thousands more converted publicly while practicing secretly. A few years later, the same pressure spread to Muslims. The dream of a multicultural Iberia, Córdoba's libraries, Toledo's translations, Seville's scholars, began to crumble. Victory had turned into purification, purification into policy, policy into fear. The Reconquista ended coexistence, and coexistence had been one of Spain's greatest strengths. There is an irony historians rarely say out loud. Granada did not just fall. It financed the modern world. With the Reconquista over, Spain redirected its military spending outward. Colonies, expeditions, conquests, and most famously, Columbus. The same monarchs who accepted Granada's surrender used that momentum to launch Spain across the Atlantic. The end of one world opened the door to another. But that new world was built on the ashes of the old one. Even after defeat, Al-Andalus lived on. In music, architecture, language, science, cuisine, poetry, and the stories of families who remembered a time when Muslims, Christians, and Jews shared the same streets. Spain erased kingdoms, but it could not erase memory. Cultures do not disappear, they echo. And the echoes of Al-Andalus still move through Spain today, like a ghost wandering its own home. The Reconquista achieved everything it set out to do. Christian unity, national identity, territorial control, end of Muslim rule in Iberia, rise of a world empire. But in doing so, it killed something priceless. The pluralism that once made Iberia the most advanced society in medieval Europe. Victory brought power, but power brought rigidity. Rigidity brought intolerance, and intolerance would shape Spain for centuries. The Reconquista reclaimed a continent, but it narrowed a culture. The Reconquista is often told as a triumph. 8 centuries. Kings and queens, crusades and crowns, swords raised in the name of God. But beneath the banners and victories lies a quieter truth. Spain did not simply defeat Islam. Spain defeated a version of itself. A version that once lit the libraries of Córdoba, that healed the sick in Toledo, that debated philosophy in Seville, that built palaces where poetry breathed through stone. A version where 3 faiths could walk the same streets and argue and worship and live. War reclaimed the land, but it also reclaimed the horizon, narrowing it. Purity replaced diversity. Authority replaced curiosity. Fear replaced dialogue. Granada fell. But something else fell with it. The idea that a continent could be shared. The Reconquista did not end coexistence. It ended the possibility of coexistence. Spain rose. An empire was born. The world changed, but every victory leaves a shadow. And the shadow of the Reconquista still stretches across history today. A reminder that when faith becomes destiny, and destiny becomes policy, and policy becomes purity, a continent can be reclaimed, but a soul can be rewritten.